All right, I think we're getting everything connected here. We are streaming live to our YouTube channel. I tend to mute that on my screen so I don't kind of hear it delayed in the background. It confuses the heck out of me. And we're a couple minutes early from starting. Usually we like to give folks a couple minutes to get in here. So we will probably be starting close to about 7:02 or thereabouts. Um, so just relax for a couple minutes and we'll be right back with you. Thanks all.
Morning, all. Or all. Good evening, all, I guess.
Good evening, Michael. How are you this evening? How was your Thanksgiving?
Oh, it's pretty good. We actually did it over 2 days. Today was day two.
Ah, can never have too much Thanksgiving.
No.
Yeah, we're right at 7 o'clock now. We'll give it another 2 minutes and then we'll kind of get rolling. Kristen, have you checked your connections? I'm assuming presentation is your other connection.
Yep, that's right.
Alrighty, cool, cool. Because what I'll probably do is we get things started, I'll do a little disclaimer and then I'll kind of hide my screen and kind of sit back and enjoy the presentation with everybody else.
Sounds good.
I really do appreciate this too. It's been kind of nice not to have to think about it. My son and his partner, it's like we go out to eat breakfast, come home, rest a little, or maybe walk around downtown or a little touristy stuff, and then out to dinner. I think gained 2 inches in the past 3 days. Haven't had a whole lot of time to think about anything besides food and resting off the food that I just ate. Um, but yeah, it's been definitely been a nice break. And before we go starting too much, I will real quick mention that I did see a notice. It is this coming week that the MORE Act will be voted on. So a quick reminder to everybody, if you get a chance to contact your House representatives, federal level representatives, and ask them to sign on as co-sponsors and vote for the MORE Act when it comes up for vote next week. I think I've got to get back at the Joe Cunningham. I haven't asked him in a while, and I'll probably even follow up with Clyburn. I hadn't heard back from him after my last letter, although I didn't really expect to. All right, we are at 7:02. We've got a nice collection of participants tonight. I thank you all for coming and being here with us. Welcome, welcome, and also welcome to anybody who might be viewing this on YouTube or viewing it later on our YouTube channel pre-record as it's recorded. We always start our meetings with our disclaimers that all of our meetings are an environment of education and awareness and are not an open market for the sale, purchase, or distribution of cannabis. We do not encourage or condone illegal behavior of any kind. Let me hide that off my screen, get that out of the way. And as I sort of rambled a few moments ago, I want to thank Kristen for being our presenter tonight. With some family in town, I've really kind of been distracted from trying to put something together. So she's gone ahead and done that for us. And we're going to be talking about, interestingly enough, how to read a research paper. She tells us that, she was telling me earlier at one of our conversations, with what she's doing, and I'm assuming school. She reads a lot of research papers, and I guess sometimes there is a knack to gleaning the information out of them. So we're going to go ahead and thank Kristen for joining us and for presenting tonight, and we're going to put this in your capable hands. So thank you.
All right, so the first thing I'm going to do, Scott, is if you're able to let me share the screen, that would be real helpful.
Got it. I think I have it. I think I clicked the right button. So give it a shot and let me know.
Yep.
All right,
That,
cool.
all righty. So just as a brief kind of to get started here at South Carolina NORML, we definitely want our advocates to be able to do their best in fighting for the cause of marijuana legalization, cannabis, anything that has to do with cannabis reformation and that sort of thing. In my last time that I spoke, I informed some people about the logical fallacies that some people tend to use in arguments. And for today, I wanted to talk about how to read a research paper. So research papers, scientific papers, they're typically pretty written in a format that's not exactly friendly for the average person. So that being said, sometimes it can be a little bit daunting when you look through a scientific paper, just kind of not really knowing where to start. And that makes it just overwhelming and difficult to get through. So I thought that one thing that would be nice would be to just talk about ways to read a scientific paper or research paper, how to get the best information from it, what kind of research papers you want to keep an eye out for, and that sort of thing. So just to get started, what to look for in a good research paper. So there are lots and lots and lots of research papers out there, and they're continually getting published. So one of the things that you want to kind of keep an eye out for is the number of subjects in the research. So as an example, in general, you kind of want to look for research subjects or research papers that have a larger number of research subjects. What that means is that we look at research that says, for example, people who have cancer and are doing some sort of chemotherapy treatment and cannabis helping with nausea. So say there's a paper that's been published that says that this one person told them that when they had their chemotherapy done, cannabis helps with their nausea. Well, one person, you could say that the cannabis could have helped with their nausea, but it could have been something other than the cannabis as well. So the more people that you have in the study, the more likely it is that the treatment, or the cannabis in this case, is what helped with that nausea. So a study that has 800 people is going to be better than a study that has 50 people in terms of credibility. You also want to look for studies and research papers that are in peer-reviewed or scholarly journals. So the difference between a peer-reviewed paper or a scholarly paper or an academic paper and just any other kind of research paper is that these papers have been reviewed by staff of scientists and people who do research, and they basically make sure that the research has been done in a way that is both ethical and also in a way that says that what they're saying is correct and not just kind of something that they're pulling out of the air. So this is kind of like the difference between looking at like a BuzzFeed article versus an article in the Journal of Clinical Medicine. Obviously, in this situation, one of them is going to be more credible than the other. But the reason why it's more credible is because of that process of an application that these papers have to go through. So where you're reading the paper is just as important as what the paper says in itself. You also want to make sure that the funders of the research aren't going to be biased towards one thing. When I think of this, the example that comes to mind is I remember in one of my drugs and behaviors classes that I took, the research, there was a study that was published that said that cigarettes had no sort of tie-in with cancer or something along those lines. Come to find out that that subject or that research had been completely funded by big tobacco industries. So obviously they're going to want the research to kind of go one way. And also funders are able to pick and choose who does the research and that sort of thing. So kind of having a good idea of who's funding the research is going to kind of give you the idea of whether or not that the research itself is biased or anything along those lines. And then lastly, another thing that you want to keep in mind is when the research was published. So preferably you want to be looking at research that has been published within the last 5 to 10 years. Obviously, there's lots of research that's been done prior to then, and that research is important. But the more recent it is, the more relevant it is, because research is like a living thing. It's constantly changing. As knowledge comes in and goes, the research continues to change with that knowledge. So the more recent, the better. There are also studies that replicate old research, basically to just kind of keep them in the loop to make sure that they're still applicable to today. So that's an important way to do so. And then just as a quick note too, research papers are never definitive. So what that means is that they're never going to completely prove anything. And again, that's just because of the changing knowledge and the way that research works. In the scientific community, you never prove a hypothesis. You either you prove that the hypothesis is incorrect, or you fail to prove that it's incorrect. You never prove that it's correct. So just kind of keep that in mind. Research papers, while they are a great tool to have in your cannabis arsenal kit, you want to make sure that you understand that you want to keep on top of the research as it keeps coming out. So continuing on to kind of what a research paper looks like, there's usually a general layout of any sort of scientific paper, and that's going to start with the abstract, and then it moves on to the introduction, the methods, the results, and the discussion. So that abstract is going to be basically your best friend. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But what it is it's just a really brief summary of the entire research study. After that, it's going to have an introduction, which is going to be a review of the current literature or the current research that's already been done. It moves on to the methods, which is how that research was done. The results, which is going to be a lot of statistics, what was and wasn't significant in the research, and then the discussion, where this discussion is going to talk about what those results might mean, as well as the limitations of the study in future directions. So some commonly used research jargon, just to kind of keep you in the aware, is N, p-value, and confounding variables. So in general, it's good to have a good understanding of what these terms mean or what general research terms mean, but you don't have to understand statistics or anything like that to be able to read a research paper. But just kind of as a good little background, N is going to be the number of subjects again, which typically bigger is better, though there are some like case studies and stuff. But when you're talking about like cannabis research, your N is going to be the number that you want to look for as big as possible. That p-value is going to come up more so in like the results in the discussion. And what the p-value is how likely a difference between two groups is caused by chance versus caused by some sort of intervention. So in research, what that would mean is like going back to the example of cannabis potentially getting rid of nausea in chemotherapy patients. If it's one patient that's had taken the cannabis that says that it helps them, the chances that that might be something other than the cannabis is pretty high. Whereas when you have 800 people that say that the cannabis got rid of the nausea, the chances that cannabis was the cause of that are a little bit higher. So P of a 0.05 is typically considered statistically significant in the scientific community, but it doesn't necessarily prove anything. So basically, when you're looking through that results section, if you see the P of 0.05 or lower, that means that the stuff that they're looking at might be statistically significant and might actually have some validity to it. But again, that's it's a little bit higher up and a little bit more than what you really need to understand, because typically when they go into the discussion, they explain what all of that means anyhow. And then lastly, confounding variables and limitations. So these are going to be things that are outside of the study that might also affect what the outcomes of the research are. So again, going back to that cannabis and nausea, if, for example, the person that was taking the cannabis and said that their nausea went away, if they were also taking some sort of other anti-nausea medication, then that would have been a confounding variable that made it so that it's not super likely that the cannabis was what was helping. And again, this is just completely like pulling this out of the air. I'm not talking about a specific research study. This is just kind of an example. So these variables are typically what's out of the researcher's control, and it can include things such as chance, life events, and individual variability. So one person might just be a little bit different than the other. And again, if you have more and more people, then that variability starts to shrink a little bit. And it's good to understand what those limitations are in a research paper because it shows us what else that we need to research in order to prove things a point. All right, so diving into reading the research paper. If you're short on time and just in general, your best friend is going to be the abstract. So what this is it's going to be just a brief of everything that the research paper is going to be talking about, but typically it's in 250 words or less, and it's much easier to just kind of read. The nice thing about the abstract is you're able to read through that, and if you feel like it's going to be something that's interesting to you, or if you think, hey, this could be a good argument to use against people who think cannabis is X, Y, and Z, then you can continue to read on more into the paper. But in general, just the abstract, reading that is going to give you a pretty good understanding of what that research paper is about. And the layout's just like a paper in general. So it's going to start with some introductory information, move on to the methods and that sort of thing. And then at the very end, it'll talk about future research opportunities and that sort of stuff. And it also might include some things that you don't need. For example, in this specific abstract example, there is a little bit of like the statistical analyses used and that sort of thing, which unless you're a researcher and you're wanting to like replicate the research, you don't really need to try to understand that. It's way too much. And then again, once you've gotten the abstract read once you've gotten the abstract read, the last two things that you really want to look at in order to be able to really understand the research paper is going to be that introduction and the discussion. So by reading the abstract, the intro, and the discussion, you'll have a really good understanding of what that paper is going to be about. The nice thing about that, again, is that you're cutting down on the time that you spend on reading the paper. And also, you're not trying to take in too much information because, again, too much information can just be really overwhelming and it can make it hard for you to understand. It can make the point of the paper muddy. So abstract, intro, and discussion is going to be your best bet. So with that introduction, just so you're aware, what you're going to get from that is the background information that the researcher built their study on. So not only do you get a nice example of the previous studies that have been done, a breakdown of their results, so that you don't have to read those papers too, but you also kind of get to see what has and hasn't been looked at. Typically, this is also where the researcher is going to point out why they had to do their research, the gaps in the literature, the gaps in the current research that makes their research important. And it also can kind of give you a hint on how much of the information that they gleaned from other research as well. So for example, if this is a paper that's saying something anti-cannabis and you read through that introduction and all of the sources that they use are purely anti-cannabis resources and they don't include any sort of pro-cannabis resources, that's definitely a red flag because in a research paper, you want the researcher to show that they researched both sides, not just the side that works with them, because that's going to bias their research and it'll bias the results and all of that fun stuff. After that, once you move on to the discussion, you're going to see what those results suggest. So again, in the methods, you're going to have a lot of statistics, and the results, you're going to have a lot of statistics, and then the discussion just kind of takes in all of those statistics and spits out what they mean. So it's going to tell you what those statistics might hint towards, what the results might hint towards. Again, assuming that in research, you never have a definitive answer to anything. It also lays out the limitations of the study, which is really important because, again, you want to make sure that you know where the downfalls are in this study so that researchers in the future can go on and continue to do better research. And it also kind of shows the points in your argument that you have to make sure that you understand isn't quite up to snuff. And then also it suggests, again, those future research opportunities for other scientists. So just as a quick run through one more time, you have your abstract that you're going to read, gives you a nice overview of the study. And then if you're interested and you think, hey, this might really help me with explaining why I think this to Aunt Sally, then you can read that introduction and the discussion as well. And that's going to give you everything that you need to form your argument. And so you might be thinking, well, what about that methods results section as well? Like, aren't they important too? And they are, but they are to a certain crowd. It depends on what kind of information you're wanting to get. So that methods section, again, is going to be a place where you look at how that research is done. So it'll give you things like the number of participants, which you can usually find in the abstract. It'll also tell you where the participants are from and the tools they use to do their research. So with where the participants are from, that can be important just because I've seen papers where it says that they had an N of 100 people. And then in the method section, it said of those 100 people, only 50 were actually eligible and all 50 of them were males. So to read that paper without looking at that and thinking, hey, this is generalizable to all people, you see that and you think, well, actually, only 50 people did this study and they're all males, so you don't know the generalizability for that. But a good researcher in a good peer-reviewed article or paper is going to point out that problem in the discussion. So typically you're able to see all that there. But if this isn't a peer-reviewed article or you just want to double check and make sure, looking at the methods is definitely a possibility and a good place to go. And then that results section, while it says results and it sounds like it would be interesting, it's actually mostly just the statistical breakdown, which is very overwhelming. I don't even try to look at the results section usually, because again, once you go into that discussion portion, they're going to chew up all of the statistics and spit it out in a way that you could actually glean some information from it. And then the last bit of food for thought, since we've talked a little bit about research papers, and I'm sure everyone's real excited about, about looking up research papers on cannabis so that they can actually understand some things with it. I will give you a little bit of a warning that a lot of these, like JSTOR and a lot of the databases that I've looked up, even as I was preparing for this presentation a little bit, you notice that a lot of the research on cannabis is typically drawn towards the more negative aspects, including things like use disorders, treatments, and stuff like that. And you kind of get to thinking about it because, you know, it's interesting that that's the case. But if you do think about the people who typically fund cannabis research, that's going to be like the National Institute of Health, as well as the National Institute of Drug Abuse. So when you have these funders who are choosing to fund certain research studies about things like treatments for cannabis use disorder or cannabis use disorder in couples or that sort of thing, a lot of the trying to fix things that are already too far gone or bad is going to be what is funded. And again, that's purely because of the funders. Also, not to mention the fact that cannabis is a Schedule I drug, which means that there are tons and tons of hoops that people have to jump through. And honestly, for a lot of researchers, the time and effort on getting through the research that they want to do is just way too much for them to even waste their time on. So just as a quick little note, again, you want to call people to let them know that you support the MORE Act, because we definitely want to deschedule marijuana and cannabis. But that is the general outline of the research, or sorry, that's the general discussion that I wanted to get through today regarding research papers. I know it's kind of quick and easy, but I'm definitely tired after this holiday week. So I did want to open up the floor to any questions, any discussion. Also, if anyone on YouTube wants to comment, Facebook wants to comment, or email us at lowcountrynormal@gmail.com, definitely happy to answer any of those questions.
Well, you know me, I always have to chime in or want to chime in anyway. First off, I love the tail end, calling on legislators about the MORE Act. But really, what to me is significant with some of this is this last slide. Two of the biggest research funders are the National Institute of Health and the National Institute of Drug Abuse, both of them government agencies, both of them, in my opinion, part of the propaganda machine that has been kind of telling us that marijuana needs to be prohibited for many, many decades now. And also, as you mentioned, there are, especially with Schedule I drugs, research stipulations. The DEA controls all permissions for cannabis research. And the numbers that statistics I have roughly off the top of my head is 90%, 96% of all cannabis research that has been permitted by the DEA has been permitted to research the negative effects of cannabis. Only about 4%, maybe it's 5 or 6. The numbers are maybe 94% to 6%, somewhere in there, 95 to 5%, have been for positive results of cannabis, to research positive benefits or positive effects. There we go, of cannabis. And I've actually listened to some researchers sort of discuss their process on trying to get their applications into the DEA. And like I remember one specifically was talking about they wanted to do some research into the benefits of cannabis. They were, I think, turned down or just ignored right off the bat. So they rewrote their proposal to make it sound like they wanted to research negative effects of cannabis. And then they got approved. So that just sort of shows the bias in the DEA. And again, as I've said many times on these conversations, the DEA is not a medical or a scientific organization. They are an enforcement organization and really should have no control over who's researching what. That should be put into some other hands besides an enforcement agency. The other thing I wanted to sort of kind of mention on this is, as you were talking about the like the N number, the number of participants in a particular survey or a research study. That very much applies to kind of what we're doing with our cannabis, South Carolina cannabis survey. And I wanted to touch on that briefly tonight, mainly because we kind of put that out there and then I think promoted it like a couple of days. Well, actually, I think I promoted it one day. And then I came to the realization that the SurveyMonkey application that I was trying to utilize for that particular survey limited us to seeing the first 100 responses, and to be able to view any further responses, they want money. And I think at best it's like $100, so I can like see the results of the survey that we've now got approximately 170 responses to. I can't really justify that kind of funds at the moment. And so what I've done in the meantime, I found a different app that we can use that gives us unlimited responses, and it's still free. And even if we want some of the add-on features, I think it comes down to $20 a month on that particular one. So I've redone the survey on that particular platform, and I'm going to wait and call it the 2021 South Carolina Cannabis Survey, and we'll start it up in the beginning of January. Bes- uh, Besides that, our responses for those first 100 were very positive. But as we've kind of discussed on this conversation before, the first people that probably saw the link to the survey were already followers of some of our social media. And so it wasn't as a broad of a sampling as we would like, and possibly getting some less supportive people answering the question as well. There were still a couple people that were kind of, no, I don't think it should be legalized, but it was very low numbers, like 1 or 2% versus about 95% that said it should be legalized for medical, and may have been 86% for, oh, I'm sorry, I think it was in the 90s also for recreational. What surprised me, I think it dropped down to like 86% for decriminalization. But again, those numbers are kind of fast and loose because we only really can see the first 100 respondents to the survey. So that's all about that. But otherwise, yes, I found your presentation very informative. But yeah, there are some good points you made about the DEA's control over the process and where the funding comes from for the research that we see out there. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I do just want to note too that there are organizations that do help fund research on like cannabis and other drugs, but obviously like government funding is going to be where the researchers get the most bang for their buck. And until we deschedule and until we decriminalize and do all that fun stuff, we're really not going to have great research done. So it's important.
Yeah, I think some of our best research is coming, of course, from other countries. Israel's been doing a lot of research on cannabis since the 50s. And much of that research, mind you, is funded by the U.S. government. So, here they're not allowing it, but they'll spend our tax dollars to let Israel research it. I don't understand government. That's why I do what I do. Any other comments on or questions for Kristen this evening on the research paper? Um, how to read a research paper? Everybody's quiet. All right. I appreciate everybody though joining us tonight. Um, Now I want to go out and start finding some research papers to look at and pick them apart a little bit. Oh, look, it's another one by the NIDA. NIDA just kind of drives me crazy. I think I looked into it a couple years ago, and the millions of dollars that are uh, even funneled through South Carolina. Um, I haven't seen it lately, but a couple of years ago, there was a website called the Blunt Truth SC for South Carolina, and it was basically propaganda about marijuana here in South Carolina. And then there's an organization, I don't have the name of them in front of me, but they claim to be sort of a um, drug education for high school students, and they actually go into schools and they take law enforcement officers with them and they spread the propaganda. They actually had received a 4-year grant totaling about a $500,000, $125,000 a year. I can't figure out what they were spending the money on. But basically they'd every now and again show up at some high school in an auditorium, and it was actually hard to find their promotions of those sort of things and to the public, because they were probably just spread through the school. So as an advocacy group, it was really kind of hard to track where these tax dollars were going and what they were doing with them. But $500,000, and at that point they were really pushing against marijuana. I've seen some of those groups start to shift over the past year or two, even here in South Carolina, stopping their focus on cannabis and now talking more about the opioid epidemic and of course meth and other hard drugs. Um, but there's still the marijuana propaganda in South Carolina going strong. But yeah, that's sort of my kind of spin on a little bit of that. Um, Otherwise, I guess we'll kind of wrap up this evening by first off thanking Kristen for your presentation. I think it's very thoughtful and informational. I want to thank everybody who's joined us this evening. If you have any questions or comments, you can always contact us through our website, which is normalsc.org, or email me. Currently, it's still lowcountrynormal@gmail.com. We will be working on, actually, I've acquired a new email address of normalsouthcarolina@gmail.com. That was the shortest version I could find. Can't spell it all out. I think some of the other, like SC normals, um, was allocated by one of our other chapters that's no longer functioning here in the state. So if I can access them, actually, I'm trying to access the scnormal.org domain name. I had acquired that a couple of years back and gave it to Columbia Normal. And since they're not operational, we've sort of contacted their folks and see if we can get that domain back, just to sort of point out our servers. Anyway, that's how to get a hold of us. Usually if you've been here before, you'll easily find me on Facebook. I communicate through that probably way more than I should be on it. We also post to our lost track of Twitter and our Instagram account pretty regularly. Also, you will find our meetings recorded on YouTube. We stream them there live, and then they stay out as recorded meetings. Otherwise, we'll be back here next Sunday, 7 o'clock. I think I'm going to try and come up with something a little bit more festive to talk about, and hopefully we'll have some results of the MORE Act to discuss by then, by the MORE Act vote. But otherwise, yeah, keep an eye out on our social media for our subject for next week. And thanks for joining us. Have a good night, y'all. Bye-bye now.